everybody, Annette Evans from On Her Own here, and I want to talk to you about one of my favorite nerdy subjects. We're going to do a whole bunch of stuff today and over the coming weeks about knives and knives for self-defense and sharp pokey objects for self-defense because it's a super popular topic and everybody has thoughts about it. So we're going to go through what's important to know, maybe do a little bit of myth busting, and help you think about whether or not knives are an appropriate choice for your self-defense. So knives, especially for women, are really, really popular because how many people have told a woman, or how many women have thought, well, I'll just stick a knife in my purse, in my pocket, on my waistband, and use it for self-defense. So really, really common. And what happens most of the time is they're given a folding knife of some sort, they stick it in their pocket, and they feel safer. Maybe they're given a small fixed blade knife of some sort and they carry that around on their waistband or something like that and they feel safe. But is that really a good solution to your self-defense? Maybe, maybe not. There's a lot of pros, but there are a lot of cons. And I like thinking about the cons first because if you can't get over those, none of the pros are really going to matter to you. Now, the biggest con to me, and maybe it is for you or not, is that knives are lethal weapons. A lot of us don't think about that because it's so harmless to go, oh, I've got a Swiss Army knife in my pocket, so what kind of harm is that going to do? It's not a big deal. But here's the problem. Whether or not you actually manage to do a lot of damage to somebody with your knife, it is still a knife. It's a blade, it's sharp, it's pointy. The law is going to consider that a lethal weapon. You might not be okay with that both from a legal perspective and a moral perspective. Not everybody is okay with the idea of killing somebody for self-defense, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. What I don't want is for you to get stuck in that kind of situation and end up hurting somebody really, really badly when you're not okay with that. And that's the other thing about knives, is you gotta be up close and personal to use them. There's no way to defend yourself with a knife effectively and not be right in somebody's face. There's other tools like pepper spray, one of my favorites, which is a little bit more of a distance. You don't have to wait until they're in your face with their arms around you or grabbing you before you can actually use the tool for more than intimidation. And that means you got to know how to fight. And not everybody is comfortable with that, and that's okay. And that also means that that knife is going to be used to cut or stab somebody. And not everybody's okay with that either. How many of you have some challenges when you're in the kitchen and you have to cut up some raw meat? That's already dead meat that's sitting on your counter ready to become your dinner. It's a little bit different when it's somebody else, even when they're trying to hurt you. I like to say that the first stab, probably not as challenging as the second one after you've figured out that there's all this like blood and gross stuff and things happening. And you don't want to find out you're not okay with that second stab when you really need to make it. And here's the other thing about being in a confrontation where you're using a knife, somebody else has a knife available, is all that blood and stuff that comes out. If you get any of that in you through like your nose, your mouth, into a cut that you have, a cut that comes from that knife being out, all those diseases and bugs and everything else that are out there in the world and out there in your bad guy could go to you. To me, that's a really big downside of deciding to use the knife for self-defense. It's not the kind of fight I want to be in. I don't know if it's the kind of fight you want to be in. Lots and lots of bad things. But there are good reasons to carry a knife for self-defense as well. The most obvious one, at least to me, is that knives are really, really easy to carry and to conceal. When you have a gun, it's kind of big and lumpy, there's a lot to it. Or you can carry a knife, and this is one of my favorite personal carry knives, and you see it's smaller than my hand. It's very, very easy to clip to my waistband, clip to a pair of yoga pants or shorts, carry it around, it doesn't print, it's lightweight, I barely notice that it's there. So there's a lot to be said for that. As well, in a lot of places, guns can be restricted, they require carry permits, you might not be able to get one. There's a lot of bad consequences in a lot of places if you are carrying a gun where you aren't supposed to be carrying a gun, but they may not restrict knives. I am not saying, and don't say that I am saying that I'm telling you you can carry a knife where you're not allowed to carry weapons. That's not it. But there are places where you can't carry a gun that you can carry a knife. Or there are places or clothing choices you might make where a gun is going to be really, really hard with what you have available, and a knife is going to be a whole lot easier. So that's one of the biggest advantages. Here's sort of an advantage and disadvantage of knives. We talked earlier about how they are lethal. They can kill somebody, they can hurt somebody really, really badly. That can be a good thing because to stop a determined bad guy, sometimes you need to do that. That can also be a bad thing because knives aren't as good at that as we think they can be. It could take a while for somebody to even realize that they've been sliced or stabbed or something else. And this whole idea of, well, I'll cut them on a certain tendon and then they won't be able to use their arm anymore is really hard because they don't want to be cut there. But knives are, in fact, lethal tools. They're going to be something that can be very effective. And because they're so easy to carry, they might be the right choice for you. You just have to be aware of all the downsides. So, should you carry a knife for self-defense? I don't know. I can't tell you. I can give you some pros and cons, and we're going to walk over the coming weeks through some of the particular things that will help make it a better or worse choice for you. But here's the conclusion. Knives are great for self-defense if you are willing to use lethal force in close quarters with somebody else. So knives for self-defense, most people think about using folding knives. That's what I was told to use when I was in college. I bet any of the women listening out there have heard at some point in their life to stick a folding knife in their pocket, to the extent we have pockets, in their purses, whatever. There's a lot of downsides to folding knives, and I want to talk about those in particular because they're such a common suggestion for all of us, really. And how many of us have told somebody else, well, just take this knife and you can use that to feel safer and it'll make you safer. Maybe. So the big problem with a folding knife is that it's a folding knife, which means that instead of a fixed blade knife, like for instance, this one, it's where the handle and the blade are all together in one piece and you don't have this problem of it perhaps breaking in the middle or folding over your hand or something like that. With the folding knife, that's a much bigger potential problem. So you have this, which is just a standard little Kershaw pocket knife. It's the one that I carried for many years myself. And you saw already that I can open it with one hand, though it takes a little bit, but really it's easiest to open with two hands. And certainly I have to close it with two hands, which is good and bad. But what happens with the folding knife problem is even after you get it out, you also have to be concerned about the fact that it needs to stay open. And that becomes a little bit more problematic than you might think when it comes to having that knife hit a human being, their clothing, bone, something else. Even in the middle of a fight, maybe it hits a wall or a doorway or the ground. And that lock mechanism that keeps the knife open might fail. And it's a really complicated world out there on how many lock mechanisms and opening mechanisms exist. I have a whole bunch of knives on this table here, as you can see, and a lot of them are folding knives because I want to show you some ones that are great for what they're good for, but maybe not so great for self-defense. For instance, this is a very classic Opinel fruit knife, paring knife. This is the kind of thing that you take with you to the office to cut up your apple for lunch on travels around the world so you can slice up your cheese. And it's actually got a really great locking mechanism. But watch what it takes for me to open this knife. I have to turn the collar, to unfold the blade, I have to turn the collar back. And now, yeah, this is really strong. But do you think you could do that when some guy's yelling at you and running at you and trying to hit you? Probably not. And here's another thing. If you're using that knife to cut up your apples and your cheese for lunch, and highly approve, that's one of my favorite snacks too, that blade is going to get dull over time. And that's exactly what you don't want. Having a dedicated self-defense knife is a really good idea. As I like to put it, I have box openers and I have people openers. I like opening boxes, I don't like opening people, but if I have to open a people, I really want it to actually work. And my box knife How many of you have opened a box with that knife or a pair of scissors, and every box gets a little bit harder to open? Do you want to stake your life on that knife? And we get into also the classic Swiss Army knife. How many of you have owned one of these at some point in your life? Pretty much everybody. Problem with the Swiss Army knife, besides the fact that you have to figure out which one is the blade when you need it, and every one of us, which means every one of us who has ever owned one, which means every one of us, have taken at least 3 tries to figure out which one's the blade. Just like it takes 3 tries to plug in a USB plug every single time. So you finally get it out, and it's got this itsy bitsy little blade. Itsy bitsy little blade. Do you really think that's going to do a whole lot for you, again, in the middle of some guy coming, screaming and yelling at you, and you're going, oh, I got a knife, after you've done all of that? Because here's the thing about knives. Unlike pepper spray, unlike a flashlight, we don't generally get to walk around the world with a knife ready to go in our hands. I can't walk into a dark parking lot and be like, what's going to happen? And have this knife out and ready to go. So I have to be able to do all of that. Now, you'll hear from some people, well, I have a knife, the folding knife, with this great opening mechanism that's going to make it much easier to use. It's going to be foolproof when I want to get it out. Kinda. So this is a Spyderco Delica. Of course it's purple. What other color would it be? And it's got this big thumb hole here that's supposed to make it easier. You kind of stab your thumb into it and you can... I think my point has been made. Or you have something that has something called a wave feature, which you might have heard about if you've been digging into the world of knives for self-defense. This is a training knife that I have that has a wave feature on it. It hasn't been optimized, but the idea is you clip it into your pocket, and as you draw it out of your pocket, the wave catches on the corner of the pocket and it flips the knife open. Sounds really, really great in theory. You got to get the knife out at the right angle, and something that a lot of people don't talk about is that fabric that it catches on has to be sturdy enough to activate the wave. So I'm a girl, I have girl pockets, obviously. Well, maybe not obviously, but when I have girl pockets, those pants don't always have the kind of fabric structure that's necessary to activate the wave. The other thing with waves and these other semi-auto openers is sometimes they open like this. And I'm sure you can imagine what might be a problem if you try to use this knife or hold this knife while somebody is attacking you and this happens. I don't know about you, but that's a bad day. I don't want my self-defense tools to hurt me. In fact, if you watch other videos that I've done for InRange, you've seen that that's one of my big factors for saying a self-defense tool is completely unacceptable, is that it's as likely to hurt you as to hurt somebody else. That's not to say that there aren't folders that are appropriate for self-defense. So we have ones that are out here that have sufficient locking mechanisms where they will be strong enough. And what you're usually looking for when you do that is a reputable manufacturer who will tell you something that this knife has an axis lock or a frame lock, something like that. And you can also check reviews on the durability. I do not recommend testing this by yourself. Some people will say, well, you get a heavy bag or a piece of meat and you take your knife and you go stabbing with it. I think you can see where I'm going, where if that fails when you test, that might not be a good day and you're going to get to know your local urgent care really, really well. But there are blades that do, when you are able to get them open, stay open so that they are appropriate for this kind of use. The other thing is there are better and worse ways to open some of these knives for self-defense. And that's a good thing to know as well if you're going to do that. And instead of relying on, well, I have a flipper. Wait, now I'm done. Is there better and worse ways to do this? What I like is Chris Fry's stab method, where you carry that blade in your pocket and you slap where it is, you pull the blade out while it's indexed in your hand, you anchor it to your hip, You flip out the blade with your thumb, and you can already see, even in this kind of circumstance, it's a little tricky to do, but you can practice it. You flip out that blade with your thumb, and then you grab it in your fist, and you're ready to go. There is a video on my YouTube channel, On Her Own Life, that will show you how to do that, and it's practicable, and it's something that can be viable. It's just kind of hard to do. That's one of the reasons I really, really love fixed blades for self-defense, because then the real problem is just getting to the blade. Again, we can't walk around with something in our hand and ready to go, so we have to be able to think about, well, if somebody has their arms around me, if they're grabbing my arm, if they're hitting me, what do I do to get there? This is where I do a lot with the ShivWorks curriculum of finding ways to get some time and some space in the middle of that fight so that I can get that blade into the running. Lots of detail there, something that I don't think we can get into, but it's worth knowing that part of the downsides of carrying a knife is you have to be able to get to the knife and what that's going to involve, and then how to actually use the knife. If you talk to people who do Filipino martial arts, they'll talk to you about, and you'll see these like fancy patterns where they slash, and you're going to do this sort of pattern and it's going to cut this tendon or do that kind of damage to them. And it looks really, really pretty, and I've got nothing wrong with it as a fun thing to do and something for you to enjoy as a martial arts form. It doesn't work so well in real life though, because in real life, the other guy gets a vote. And if he sees you with knives out, ready to swing, do you think he's gonna stand still for you to target exactly where you wanna go? Probably not. Realistically, what we see work in the real world and work in training evolutions is literally becoming a sewing machine, where you hold that blade and you go, and you're pretty much just stabbing it into them and hoping you can do enough damage to slow them down so that you can get away or they'll stop trying to hurt you. One side note I want to make is that some people will talk about punch daggers and how they're a little bit different to use. So a punch dagger is the sort of blade that you hold onto like this, and it creates, then you have something sticking out from your knuckles, so when you punch them, that blade goes in instead of your knuckles. They can be a good option for people who don't have a ton of training because it's a very natural motion to punch somebody. However, and there's always a however, they can be constructed in ways that are going to hurt you. So we'll talk about that too as we move through pros and cons of various knives you might choose for self-defense. Because much like the gun world and much like the pepper spray world and every other world of self-defense, the devil's already in the details of your equipment choice. So come back, we're gonna keep talking about knives. It's one of my favorite topics. I'm sure a lot of you have some thoughts that you wanna see if you are right or wrong about, or tell me I am right or wrong about. So come back for more, and in the meantime, you can find more of my content, not just here on InRange, but at my site, onherown.life, which also links to all of my social media. See you next time.